Yeah. Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. I'm a headliner.
Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. It's Kyle. It's Dr. Ethan Turner. Did it right that time. And we are here to talk to you about some NFL draft prospects. The Combine finishing up as we're recording this video. And there's a lot of injury news that's kind of coming out right now. I mean, that's what happens during the Combine. Guys run around in their underwear, they bench press, and we find out a bunch of medical things about them as well. But of course, Dr. Ethan Turner has one of the most comprehensive rookie injury guides that you're going to find anywhere. You can pre-order that right now at thefantasyheadliners.com. Correct, Ethan? You can pre-order it, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. All right. Because he's got research even back to like high school days, junior high days, any injury these kids have had, he knows about it. So, and I do apologize too. I've got like this weird headphone thing going on today, but my mic was really weird. It was picking them up twice. I don't know what's going on, but we had so much good information we had to get it to you right away. So, Ethan, how are things going?
Yeah, things are going good. I get a lot of questions in the off season like, Ethan, where are you? What are you doing? Why aren't you on shows all the time? Where could you have gone? And just know that in the off season, I am 100% devoted to this rookie guide. So I just have spent the last 5 off seasons collecting rookie and NFL prospect injury data because one, nobody else will look it up for me. So I have to do it myself, Thanos style. And two, I think if we have this data and we get enough of it, we're going to be able to start making some really good injury takes based off of it. So my goal is obviously to limit the number of times injuries impact our fantasy teams during the year. And part of that is knowing what a player's history was. So injury history, most important thing we have for predicting future injuries.
And I mean, you've absolutely nailed it, like on running backs recently too. Like I feel like on Twitter, you put something a while back where you were like, yeah, I've nailed like the riskiest running backs over the last like 4 or 5 years or something like that. Correct?
Yes. Yep. The injury risk rating system that I created for this that basically compares all players apples to apples across positions has successfully named the biggest bust of each of the last 4 running back classes.
Yes. Well, we're going to be talking some more injury today because a lot of people at the Combine, again, they go through all these medical evaluations and we know some of these things beforehand, but those medical things always kind of pop back up at this time of the year because of them being at the Combine and going through it. So let's go to Carson Strong first. Taking a look at him, osteochondritis.
Yeah.
Was I close?
Yeah.
Yes. 3 knee surgeries dating back to 2017. Do we need to be worried about him?
Well, I think the question is just like, how much of an issue is this going to be going forward? So for the people watching, so osteochondritis, gosh, I can't even say it. I'm supposed to be the doctor. Osteochondritis dissecans is basically where the cartilage starts to pull away from the bone, and it usually happens in adolescents or high school age kids, and it starts to come off, and it can eventually completely fall off, and then at that point you basically have a big chunk or a hole missing out of the bone and the cartilage. And so it usually happens in the knee. For Carson Strong, it was his right knee. So back in high school, he had surgery. They put in some biodegradable screws to basically try to re-adhere that cartilage back. And what we've known is that, in the last year, he's had 2 more knee scopes to address that knee. So he's now up to 3 knee surgeries in his career on one knee. And so do I think Carson Strong is like the best quarterback from this class? No, but I do think it's worth knowing for super flex leagues, especially rookie drafts, that this might be something that he has to deal with for, a while. It's not like it was a specific injury. It's actually a medical condition that he had coming into college. And we've seen it now affect him a lot in the last, year and a half.
Now, let's move on to a couple of guys coming off of ACL injuries. One guy was supposed to be the wide receiver one in this draft, kind of brought back down a little bit after that ACL tear, but we're talking about Jameson Williams and George Pickens.
Yeah, this is really kind of a bummer, just from a timing perspective. He tears his ACL, in the national championship game. There's not really a worse place that you can tear your ACL. And so he did decide to enter the NFL draft, but we're not going to really get any testing numbers. We know he was a good athlete, but we don't really have any recent data on him, except that we know that, of course, his camp is telling us that he's way ahead in his rehab. So I have yet to find an NFL player that was not way ahead in their rehab. So that doesn't really tell us a whole lot. He is doing some drills that are a little sport specific, maybe a little, slightly ahead of what you would expect from a traditional ACL recovery. The problem is that this is an elite athlete. So if he wasn't ahead compared to like the average, I would be more concerned. So yes, he is ahead from what we would expect for an ACL recovery, but it's not really saying much because we would also expect that to be the norm for someone of that caliber of an athlete.
All right, so now for George Pickens, obviously tore his earlier in the year. Where does he stand?
Yeah, so with Pickens, the timeline is quite a bit different. So he tore his ACL back in March of last year. He actually was able to make it back for a game this season. A lot of people thought maybe he would just take the whole year off and enter the NFL draft. So he did show that his love of the game, as the football guys like to say it. So, from a timeline perspective, he is able to test or was able to test at the combine. Still has that straight line speed, which is something you want to see. The big thing with him, though, is that we know now that he's kind of past the risk stage from, something major happening to his ACL. He's past the infection stage. He's past the scar tissue stage that we saw take out a player like Bryce Love, somebody who we don't really talk about anymore. But remember that Bryce Love had an ACL tear, in his last college game. And everyone, just kind of forgot that he never made it to the NFL. He got drafted and then he still had knee issues when he got to the NFL. And so it's just kind of the reason we're bringing up all these ACL tears is that we want people to know that this happened. And it's interesting at where these guys are coming from when they had the ACL and how it affects how we look at them heading into rookie drafts. So Pickens is good. Pickens is good to go. He should be fine. We're past the risk stage with him.
So now moving from, a couple of guys either coming off or in the middle of ACL injuries to Zamir White, 2 ACL tears in his history. What's kind of the risk with him moving forward?
Well, the biggest concern with Zamir is that, his right ACL tear came when he was a senior in high school, and then he tore his left ACL his freshman year. And so when we're talking about ACL tears from back then, we know that statistically speaking, players that tear their ACL when they are in high school or in their early to late teens tend to develop arthritis in their knees by the time they're in the middle of their 20s. So it's just what we have found in the research. Almost, I think it's 2/3 of them develop some type of, arthritis in their knee by the time they're 25. And so with a guy like Zamir White, it comes up and it brings up the idea of like a Todd Gurley, where we saw this, where Todd Gurley was really, really elite, great athlete, amazing running back. And then he just fell off of a cliff. Now he tore his ACL early in his college career too. So that's where the concern comes from with running backs. The fact that he's torn both sides is not really uncommon. NFL players tend to have repeat tears at a higher rate than the average person does because they're still exposed to the stress of being a college football player. But, when we have that history, it makes you wonder like, oh, is this something where anatomically he is more prone to this type of injury? Now, I know he's been healthy since then, but it's not like his anatomy has changed. So, we saw this most recently with actually Jake Butt. Some people might remember him. He was the tight end that played for the Broncos. He actually tore his ACL 3 times. And so, sorry, what were you laughing about? Butt? I bet you were.
No, he was an amazing tight end for Michigan, and he tore his ACL in their bowl game, and that was really one of the big conversation pieces around, players opting out, because if he had opted out, he doesn't tear that ACL, he probably ends up going a lot higher in the draft than he does, and potentially maybe has. I don't want to say he doesn't tear his ACL, because who knows, in workouts or whatever, he still could end up tearing it. But, it absolutely just kind of got that career in the NFL off to just an awful start, because his stock just plummeted after that.
Yeah, and he tore his ACL a 3rd time. So, it's not to say that, some people think that there's this myth that, well, once you tear your ACL, you can never tear it again, or it's stronger. That's just not true. I mean, we just see it over and over and over again. In the data that I've collected, wide receivers actually that have torn their ACL prior to the NFL have a 50% re-tear rate over the last 5 years. So guys that came in the last 5 years that have torn their ACL prior to the NFL, 50% of the wide receivers tore an ACL when they got to the NFL. And so that's where our concern is that we don't have a lot of position specific data. That's why I've collected all this data, and I get to start using it for these types of situations. Statistically speaking, even in the research data that's out there, 25% chance of tearing your ACL again. We have 5 wide receivers from this class that have torn an ACL. Statistically speaking, one of them is probably going to tear an ACL again. And we know just from, seeing this play out over and over and over again, when you get 2 ACL tears, your likelihood of being like a top 12 or top 24 guy in fantasy football goes way, way, way down.
So there's 2 things I'm taking from this right now, from this little conversation we just had about multiple ACL tears. Number 1, you have such an amazing injury guide. I think you should give one away if we get to 500 likes on this video. What do you think?
I can do that.
There you go. I mean, everybody out there watching, he did not know that was coming. I did not give Ethan any heads up that I was going to do that, but it's just such an amazing guide. I feel like, number 1, you should go pre-order one. And number 2, we should hook somebody up with one.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now here's the second thing I got from it though. The younger you are, if you tear your ACL, if you're doing fantasy football, if you're a fan of a team, whatever it may be, I think you need to start looking at the aspect of a guy is going to start to fall off the cliff a lot sooner than what they may be if they're older. So for instance, if you and I, the athletic machines that we are, were to tear our ACL today, we're going to be in trouble during the late stages of our flag football career, because we're going to start to fall off a cliff. If Jake tears his ACL today, he's already there. So he's not going to fall off a cliff as much as we will. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. And I know somebody in the comments is going to bring up, Frank Gore. Frank Gore is always the guy that gets brought up when we talk about ACL tears and just career longevity.
He's a machine.
But you got to understand.
He's a robot.
You have to understand when we're talking about that situation that I have looked at 5 years of injury data, and I'm telling you that is a total anomaly. Like for every Frank Gore, I can give you 15 dudes that didn't work out that came into the league with ACL tears. So probably 20 or 30, honestly, because most of them don't work out well. And so I just want people to remember that, like, I promise you, I would not be saying these types of things if I didn't feel very, very confident that it was good fantasy advice that I'm giving you. Like, just trust me on this. Like, I've done this for a really long time.
What about a guy that's becoming widely perceived as the number 1 wide receiver in this class, Trae Burks? He's got himself a little bit of an injury history there. Not nearly as clean as maybe another guy. And that early ACL tear that we talked about, he has one in high school. What's his outlook?
Yeah, so Burks is, and I think with ACL tears, again, the high school ones actually concern me more than when they're in college already, because we don't know what their surgeon looked like. we don't know, a lot of times in college, you're going to get one of the better surgeons in the country, especially if you're at a big program. In high school, it may be just the guy that does ACL tears in your area, and he might be good and he might be not good. Like, I'm sorry, not all surgeons are amazing. I know that people will not want to hear that, but it's the truth. Same thing with their rehab. So, high school rehab is not the same as what, Jameson Williams got at Alabama. I'm sorry. Like, there are not a ton of physical therapists that deal with ACL tears all the time. And so it is tough for them to rehab those types of things or do it at a level that's at the level that you're going to get at a major college program. So Trae Burks tore his ACL in high school. Nobody talks about it because, of course, he had a relatively healthy college career. I do have 5 total injuries for him in college, or 4 in college plus the ACL tear. So I won't say that he was 100% injury free, but nothing major outside of that ACL tear. So people are going to sweep this under the rug. Go, oh, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. But just remember what I said about arthritis and the buildup and how quickly it can become an issue once they get to the NFL. So it's just worth knowing, especially if you're kind of on the fence between Burks and another wide receiver prospect or a running back. It's worth knowing that he's had this in his past, because it could be something that 3 or 4 years from now, we're going, hey man, remember when we said that he had knee issues leading back to high school? All of a sudden it's an issue every week for our fantasy teams. So it's just worth knowing.
All right. Quick answer from you. All right.
I don't know how to do that.
Somebody out here right now is watching. They're either thinking about taking Trae Burks in their rookie draft. Maybe they're thinking about, man, I really want my team to draft him here in April. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most worried, 1 being the least worried, what is your worry for him in future projections?
Well, there's only probably going to be 1 wide receiver from this class that has a higher injury risk rating. So I'm going to go with probably like a 7. I mean, I'm definitely concerned. I still think that he can be valuable, but in terms of how his injury history stacks up to the rest of the class, like, I'm sorry, he just doesn't really have the history that you're looking for with an elite top 24 wide receiver prospect. And if you think that it doesn't matter, like, again, I've been doing this for 5 years. Players with a high injury risk rating, anything over 7 or above, have combined across all positions. If they have a high injury risk rating, they have combined for 0 Pro Bowl seasons in the NFL. That's dating back for 5 seasons. So it matters. Somebody's going to break the trend eventually, but I'm just saying, like, if I say they have a high injury risk, there is a good chance that they are not a Pro Bowl level player. I'm hoping that I'm wrong this year, but I'm just letting you guys know that that's what the history has said so far.
Crazy. I want to take a quick moment here too to remind everybody that we're talking about these NFL draft prospects here sporadically on different videos. But if you want deep diving breakdowns on these guys and their profiles, mock drafts, everything you want, you got to go over to HeadlinerU here on YouTube, one of our other channels. Hit that subscribe button. Go show Chris Chow some love. He's putting a ton of information out there, and they're going to be doing player specific profiles coming up here very, very soon now that they've gathered information from the combine, and they're really going to be diving into what these guys look like in the long-term scheme of things in the NFL. And Ethan, I'm going to tell Chris that you need to go on and talk to him a little bit more about Trae Burks and this injury history, because you've got me thinking a little bit, but that's what we're supposed to do. I love it. Now, I want to move on to a guy that a lot of people have just completely forgotten about. And he was a guy that was the wide receiver 1 on a national championship team that included T. Higgins and Hunter Renfrow, both guys that are doing very well in the NFL today. And that's Justin Ross coming out of Clemson. Now, it's not really the ACL here that you have that worries me. It's not really the stress fracture in the foot, even though that is a little bit of a concern right now because it kept him from doing anything at the combine. It's that neck issue that last year almost ended his career. I mean, this is a guy that I absolutely loved. Is he cooked at this point?
Well, we'll see what the NFL thinks about it. I mean, from an injury risk perspective, like, yeah, it's not going to look
15
good.
out of 10.
Well, it only goes to 10. I scale it to 10 anything over a 10, just know that there's no coming back from that. Like it's a 10 out of 10 is as high as I let the scale go. But yeah, he'd probably be closer to like 11 or a 12 if I was actually, letting the formula go past 10. But no, the problem with Justin Ross for me, like analyzing his injury history, like, yes, the ACL tear from high school is a concern. He tore it when he was playing basketball. Not that it matters, but it's just worth knowing that he has that, just like Trae Burks. The stress fracture on his foot, okay, it's worth knowing. Again, those two by themselves would have probably put him pretty close, that high injury risk category. But this congenital fusion is something that I've never seen, because honestly, if they had found it prior to him being an NFL level prospect, they probably wouldn't have let him play football. He would have probably been a basketball player, honestly. And so he had surgery to, I think, correct it. The congenital fusion is basically when he was born, two of his vertebrae were fused together. And it puts him at increased risk for neck injuries and compression on the nerve. And so that's what he was dealing with, was basically it was compressing his nerve. He was getting a stinger or something from his neck shooting down his arm. And they went in and they corrected it. I haven't really ever gotten any great evidence or an explanation of what exactly they did with his surgery. If anybody knows Justin Ross, like if you could get that to me, that would be great. I would love to know what that surgery was all about.
Hit Ethan up on Twitter. It's right there. Shoot him a DM if you can get him that info.
I'm sure he would just love to just give some random guy all of his medical injury data. I'm sure he would just be all aboard that. But we've never seen it. So it's hard for me to gauge, like, well, is this something that, is going to be a problem down the road? Is it fixed now? Like, is he a trailblazer in this? Is he the next, Adrian Peterson for ACL tears, like congenital fusion? We're going to look back. Justin Ross, he bucked the trend. We don't know. And so when I don't know something, I get scared because I just like to know stuff. And I feel like I know a lot of things. And if I've never seen it before and it seems serious, I err on the side of caution. The NFL definitely has more info than we do about this. So if he ends up going in the third round, yeah, then we're going to look a little bit more closely. Maybe it's worth the risk. If he goes in the sixth round, we're going to know that the NFL also isn't really buying into this. Like, they know he's a concern and that they don't really trust it. And so that's how I'm treating Justin Ross. Honestly, like, he's probably not going to make it on many of my rookie draft boards. I mean, I don't draft guys that have this type of history because I've seen it over and over and over again. They bust. I'd much rather take a risk on somebody that doesn't have that type of history that could pop. We want the guys that are going to pop. Like, go draft those dudes.
Yeah, I was going to talk about Justin Ross more in one of my last videos that I did for combine players to watch, because I wanted to see what he could do. But then he was like, I've got the stress fracture. I'm not going to be able to do it. It's like, dang it. Okay, never mind. Not going to talk about him now. But I mentioned in that video too, that one thing that I was looking for was, where does he go in the draft? If he goes maybe in those middle rounds, then the NFL at that point is saying, hey, we can take a risk on this guy. If he goes late or UDFA, then at that point it's like, I've kind of probably got to stay away from him, because clearly the NFL has got, just as big of an issue with it as what somebody else might have. So if NFL teams are worried about it and he's not getting drafted, then we probably need to be just as worried about it. Last guy I want to talk about at this point still is going to be an ACL tear to talk about, but John Mechie also has a heart condition, apparently, that showed up in high school. Is that still something that is a concern as of right now?
Not really. Just because he's been cleared to play since then. They found this heart condition, cardiomegaly, when he was a freshman in high school. And so
what is that? Are you able to
he sat out his freshman season, or a portion of his freshman season, but he's been able to play without any complications. There's no other history of this like coming up or being an issue. So no, I'm not crazy concerned about the heart condition. He did have stress fractures in his shin and ankle last off season. So that's kind of a concern. And then, of course, he tore his ACL 2 weeks prior to Jamison Williams. So I'm more concerned about the stress fractures and the ACL tear than I am about the heart condition. The heart condition is just kind of worth knowing or remembering. Like maybe a team cares more about that than other teams, but I feel like it's one of those things where because it was so long ago, it's probably not going to affect his draft position much. The other two are much more indicative of like what we're looking at as far as future risk.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the heart, teams typically don't mess around. I mean, we've seen guys go to the combine, have those heart tests done and be like, nope, you're not participating. Maurice Hurst is kind of the last guy that comes to mind about that. Because he had that happen. And then the Oakland Raiders ended up taking a shot on him anyway. He's been fine ever since, but we've seen that a few times. Even Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had it pop up last year too, I believe, right? It was something that we didn't find out about it, but I think it came out after the combine to NFL teams, and that was part of the reason why they said he slipped a little bit was because he had something pop up at the combine. So, I mean, if people aren't talking about it too much right now, 100% on board with you. He's been cleared to play for a while. He's probably going to be good there. It's those other things that we'll have to end up keeping an eye on. But those are a few of the main players that Dr. Ethan Turner wants to make sure that you know more about when it comes to their injury history. And again, you got to go pre-order his injury guide, his rookie injury guide. You can do so right now at thefantasyheadliners.com. He's going to give one away if we hit 500 likes on this video as well. So make sure you comment on the video below. You got to like it and you got to comment because we'll pick one of those comments if we hit 500 likes. So make sure you comment and you come back to check because if Ethan replies to you, you're going to be getting a draft guide. And then, hey, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, you got to subscribe, got to stick around for all the great off-season content. Hit the like button on the video for us, and make sure you also go subscribe over to HeadlinerU, and make sure you catch all that content over there. Ethan, it's been a while since we've done this. Appreciate it.
Hey, man, I'm always here to talk injuries. You know how I am.
I think the last time we did a video together was like week 12 of the NFL season. And it was you and I on a live show, and I was a mess.
Yeah. You were a mess today before we started, so.
That's true. Every time we do a video together, there's something. Last time I was sick, though, and then I had to get some second wind to get going. This time, the computer was sick. You don't know what to say about that.
You guys are kind of sickly over there.
It happens. It happens. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. Thanks to Ethan for joining me. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll catch you all on the next episode. Later, all.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. Y'all stuck on third down. Your content's plain Jane. Headliners on top now. We gonna move and change. Podcast off the rip. Draft guide, so legit. Fantasy world, our game tight. You know we about that chub life. Stuck in a rut and you need some motivation. Head to the channel for this Headliner Nation. I'm a headliner.